This module is regarding the Quality Matters certification. I had the pleasure of sitting down with one of the Quality Matters certification individuals that I've had the pleasure of working with, Dr. Peter J. Shapiro, Director of Creative Online Learning Services for Florida State College at Jacksonville, addressed the following information related to the Quality Matters certification process.
Well, if we're going to talk a little bit about Quality Matters, I think you need a little bit of an historical perspective. So it began with the Maryland Online Consortium. The schools in the state of Maryland wanted to work together and they wanted to share seats in each other's online courses. But you start talking to faculty, to institutions, how are you going to do that physically? And then after that is, well, how do I know that a course from school X is going to be just as good as a course from school Y? So they refer to that as interinstitutional quality. They wanted to put together a concept that would be collegial, so that folks wouldn't feel threatened by the concept of a professional development opportunity, that everyone looks at a cycle of continuous improvement. So it took them some time, but they decided to apply for a FIPSI grant, and they referred to it as Quality Matters. Using the funding from the FIPSI grant, they developed their course design standards rubric, and they unveiled a peer review process that empowers faculty to learn about and evaluate courses based on those standards. And it ended up being a true professional development initiative. They established a method of improving online course design, and they could certify the quality of online and eventually blended college courses across institutions. Once they had this in place, they started presenting at conferences, and it was like a snowball rolling downhill. Suddenly, places had people standing in the hallways, people wanting to learn more about Quality Matters. Next thing you know, they start training people from other institutions in other states. I was very lucky to be one of the first higher ed professionals from outside the state of Maryland to be trained as a peer reviewer. And we're going back to about 2004 at this point in time. If you look at the Quality Matters website, qualitymatters.org, they've got a great deal of information on there. More than 1,300 colleges and universities throughout the world subscribed to their services at that point in time. They trained over 50,000 educators, and they certified thousands of online and blended courses. After the grant ended, they decided they needed to find a way to keep it going. And so they created a self-supporting nonprofit that up until 2014 was a part of Maryland Online, and now it is a separate organization. And basically, institutions pay annual subscriptions in order to be able to use the rubric, to potentially have courses reviewed and improved. And every few years, they review the rubric and then they re-release it. But again, since it's a subscriber-based service, you need to have paid an annual subscription to Quality Matters to actually access it. They're now an international organization. They're recognized as a leader in quality assurance for online education. And their idea is to keep the student at the center of the learning experience, to engage faculty in this professional development experience that is a continuous cycle of improvement for their online courses.
Dr. Shapiro, the rubric you had mentioned for use of scoring or evaluating an online course as a QM evaluator and reviewer, could you talk a little bit about how that process works?
Process of course review is an interesting one, and there's a couple of different flavors of it. So the one that folks will hear most about is a standard certification in which Quality Matters will have a team of folks that basically are hired. It's not a lot of money, but everyone gets a little something to participate, to go ahead and evaluate the course, and realize that we're always talking about course design. This is not about course delivery. This is not about the faculty member who might have designed the course. It is all about the design itself and what tools, information is at the center of the student experience. How can they function in this course? The quality assurance process, they describe it as continuous, centered, collegial, and collaborative. Because, as I said earlier, it's a continuous process of improvement, It's centered around the student experience. It's a peer process that is collegial, and it's a collaborative process. The courses always improve themselves. You get lots of great ideas from the peer reviewers that are external to your institution. Initially, when this was set up, very simple. You had a master reviewer, someone who chaired the review itself. Then there would be 2 other reviewers. These peer reviewers were typically, at least one of them was external to your institution. Many times it's both. They are trained specifically on how to use the rubric and how to evaluate these courses and how to provide positive reinforcement to faculty who may have designed the course itself. Again, this goes back to that collegial approach. This team gets together. One of them is a subject matter expert peer reviewer, and the other one is just considered an external peer reviewer. When I was choosing teams as a master reviewer for those that I was conducting, I tried to make sure I had at least one who had instructional design experience. I felt that was critical. And there was basically a database where we would search for those who are peer reviewers. And I actually tried to get both of them as instructional designers. It's not always possible. You look at where their subject matter expertise is and try to pick it appropriately. The process could take as little as 3 to 4 weeks. Basically, there's an initial meeting with the designer, the course designer, and the entire team on a phone call. After some materials are passed back and forth, you have a period of 2 to 3 weeks where the peer reviewers and the master reviewer go through the course. And then just the peer reviewers and the master reviewer then have a conference call to go over what they've discovered. Every single one of the standards in the rubric and every single one of the pieces of those standards will have feedback for the course designer. And it's important to keep it as positive. If there are issues, if there are things that could be improved, well, how could they improve? What's a suggestion? What's something you might have used or that you've seen other people use? Everybody learns something from the course review process. Institutions that use this external review process can have a course certified. There are internal reviews because some institutions aren't going to pay money to Quality Matters or to anyone else to have a course reviewed. They have tons of courses that need review, so they subscribe annually to Quality Matters, and then they go ahead and review courses internally, but they can't use the Quality Matters seal on a course. But they know by going through the process that they're able to provide support for the faculty who developed it and to continuously improve the course.
Instruction models can vary widely. While some may focus on how to make the lesson plans and others focus on the delivery of the content itself, the Dick and Carey instructional design model follows a more traditional systemic approach. For your assignment this week, create a 2 to 3 minute podcast to demonstrate your understanding of the Dick and Carey model. You can use any of the following free audio recording software tools: a PowerSoft, Voice Recorder, Audacity. Your submission should address the following critical elements: a summary of the different stages, an example of use for each stage, and a summary of your impression of Dick and Carey to meet your instructional design and development needs. After you've completed your recording, upload a 2 to 3 minute audio file either in WAV or MP3 to complete this assignment. If you are unable to complete an audio recording, upload a 2-page transcript addressing each critical element. I thought it would be most appropriate to actually illustrate this lesson in the form of a podcast as opposed to a video that you've been looking at over the past few modules and throughout the course. So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things regarding the different types of podcasts, and I also wanted to talk about some specific implementation strategies for learning, because the activity that you have this week is also based on some of the activities that are here, and I think you'll be able to find this podcast to be beneficial for ideas or any type of creative work you'll have in order to meet that objective. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the types of podcasts. And there are 4 different types of podcasts that are readily used for educating and informing other peoples. The most common podcast that you're going to see is a solo podcast, and that's an example of what you're listening to here. Solo podcast essentially is a designated content expert or designated person with professional experience or working knowledge within a process or topic that is delivering information in a one-way manner. And I think that's probably one of the solutions you'll look for when you are designing your learning activity for this module will be the creation or use of a solo podcast. The other podcast that is really common and really popular is an interview podcast. And for those of you that remember the IDT400 course with the module 6 on the ISD processes, I actually did an interview podcast there, and that was myself as the moderator interviewing a subject matter expert that was sharing her knowledge within a specific industry of ISD that was based on her interpretation, her knowledge, and her experience of those topics. So an interview podcast will be another very popular solution you can look for a learning strategy solution in this week's assignment. So those are the two that are going to be the most popular. The multi-host podcast is going to be very similar to the podcast that you see with the interview. Essentially, you have designated roles that are talking about specific areas. In theory, a modern form of a multi-host podcast essentially is listening to a radio show. You're listening to people talk about their perspectives, their experiences, and their knowledge based on topics that have been presented to them. So you're going to see interviews that take place with them. You're going to see designated forums. It can be panel groups. A lot of this is just done on an on-demand basis for podcasting that is still very highly effective and used today with the ability to add an RSS, which stands for really simple syndication, and alert people that subscribe to those podcasts for new information that's there. So the multi-host podcast is very similar to the interview podcast and just an expansion of knowledge base that's across the forum. The last podcast is a vodcast, vidcast, or essentially what is known as a video podcast. And you're going to see these, to some degree, a good example of these would be the weekly overview modules that you've seen in this course and the other courses in the MicroMaster Certificate program. It's introducing concepts that are related specifically to the module for that week. It's a summation of the processes and topics that you'll be looking at. And it's my perspective as the designer of those areas to share just a real brief overview and adding some video narration to it, just a little bit of digital media enhancements that goes along with those. So those are the 4 most common types of podcasts that you're going to see used within learning and training and development. Now let's talk about some implementation strategies. Podcasting gives you a lot of capability from a virtual perspective in the online learning and collaboration fields. So take, for example, higher education. One of the courses that I designed from an instructional design perspective is getting people to add value-added perspective of historical significant figures, facts about events that are there. If you look at this week's resources, you can go to a historical community that has podcasts that recap specific learning events that have transpired across our country. I don't want you to think specifically related to an event that happened centuries ago. You can look at anything. If you're looking for a global event, you can talk about elections, changes in government. We seem to be dealing with some catastrophic weather events that are related to impact of human life. There's a lot of different sources out there, a lot of different topics that you can use. Find one of these resources, find a time that's convenient for your learners or your audience, and have them listen to the podcast, listen to the perspective of questions that are being asked. It's like listening to a guest speaker right in the comfort of your own living room or from a virtual sense that are there. So that's really the implementation strategy from an academic sense of using those types of podcasts that are there. They can support single objective-based learning activity creations. They supplement the reinforcement of a larger topic that you're talking about. So in the case of the weather catastrophes that we've been dealing with across the world over the last 6-8 months, you can frame those into a meteorology class. You can frame those into an economics class. You can form those really into a business management perspective, insurance, fraud. You can take any perspective from a single entity of a topic that's there. What makes the podcast so popular is your creativity to be adaptive and reflect that creativity into making the perspective of the content you've chosen to a really actionable item that learners can really dig deep into, understand the perspective and subject matter of the expert that is delivering the information, and extracting the objective that you've defined from there. So that's really how you can do it from an implementation strategy. I really encourage you to use the power of content matter experts. These are areas that you can look at. TED Talks is another one that's become very popular. I guess you can attribute that to be very similar to a video vodcast if you would like to. It's the same similar concept. But again, you're introducing sources of content through the power of digital media into a learning environment. This can be done from an auditory or video perspective. For the benefit of this module, I've chosen to do the audio perspective for the capability of the mobile enhancement and the ability of people to use these things on the go and on demand. So I hope I've given you some ideas on what you can do to complete the activity for this week's module. I hope I've introduced you to some of the more common types of podcasts that are out there, not to mention the single solo podcast that you're listening to. So I hope you really found the information beneficial and are able to apply it to this week's activity. Good luck, everybody, and I'll talk to you in class. Thanks.